So I think I've talked about so many things so many times to the Native Plant Society. People wanted to know about what can we do in our own yards. And so this little talk is entitled Pollination in the Urban Environment in Public Spaces and especially in our own gardens. I have my clicker, I have to get it working now. Okay. So we live in Florida, and I don't mean to boast in case anybody from up north is tuned in, but it is the land of flowers. We have lots of landscaping here with plants from all over the world. Some of us even landscape with native plants. And basically, the more flowers you have, the more flower visitors you're going to see. And among those flower visitors are pollinators, things that actually move pollen and help the plants reproduce. This is sort of a little outline of my talk here. The guidelines for pollinator-friendly yards are basically less lawn and more flowers, more flowering plants. And I've watched a good state Native Plant Society, or maybe it was the Wildflower Society, about the Lawn to Wildflowers project. Maybe some of you saw that. You need places for visitors, animal visitors to flowers to hide, perch, and nest. For some, you need host plants for their immature stages and water resources. But probably the most important thing I've found in my own yard and in public spaces I've helped to put gardens into is the more native plants you have, the greater the diversity of visitors to the plants. So Florida was named by the early Spanish settlers. Here's a very ancient looking map. And everybody wants to come to Florida for a vacation, orange blossoms, sunshine, pelicans, fish, and oranges. A good friend of mine from high school always remembers my birthday. And here is a historic postcard pamphlet, postmarked long before I was born, not that long, less than 10 years before I was born. But postmarked this year, coming to me for my birthday, and it features our city of Miami. On the back of the little booklet is a beautiful Royal Poinciana tree and landscape full of beautiful flowers. When you open this booklet, it has many pages, and it shows Miami to be a big city with lots of sun, fun, and flowers everywhere. And of course, we have palm trees too, featured in many of the pictures in this postcard booklet. But remember, palm trees are flowering plants, and they have lots of flowers when they bloom. I got a kick out of this message from the original sender of the postcard. Be home sometime next week, I hope. Miami is a bad town to live in. Your loving son, Don. Now, Don evidently didn't like Miami, but how can you not like Miami when you can see a pirate ship at any time of the year? This one I think was for Halloween. Here's one for Christmas, the Shivering Timbers. And it's a land of, South Florida is a land of boat parades. And here is the Ludlam Glades Canal boat parade with Santa and an elf paddling their canoe. Oops. But really, this talk isn't about Miami as much as it is about the birds, the butterflies, the bees, and other things that visit flowers. This is a little quartet of beautiful stamps that came out about 10 years ago when National Pollinator Day was first approved by Congress. Postage was only 41 cents then, but some of the main pollination syndromes or types are shown. And in this postage stamp suite, we have birds, the hummingbird, lower left, butterflies in the upper left, bees in the lower right. Here is a bumblebee buzzing the anthers of this solanum. You can see the pollen flying around. One kind of pollinator we don't have here in South Florida are bats. We have bats, but they are insectivorous bats. In fact, lots of different kinds of animals visit flowers. It's a whole wonderful world of pollinators. And I'm going to point out the kind we do have in Florida here, hummingbird and other birds. Bees, and there are loads of kinds of bees and little flying insects, flies, wasps, other things. Butterflies. I didn't put a star by the bright blue morpho butterfly because we don't have those here, but anyway. Hawk moths, sometimes called hummingbird moths. They quiver when you hold them in your hand. They're just beautiful. They're mostly active at night, but there are a few that fly during the day. Beetles and even some herpetofauna visit flowers and may serve as pollinators. So we're going to start with birds. What plants are for the birds? These are usually those that provide nectar for the birds to drink and bugs for them to eat. Of course, there's a whole nother bunch of plants that make fruits that birds like, but we're focusing on pollination today. Here's a beautiful bird that we have had nesting around our house, the spot-breasted oriole. And I guess in the picture I chose here, they're visiting melaleuca flowers, an exotic pest plant. But we see them in our front yard visiting the firebush in the lower left of this picture, Hamelia patens. And because they visit the trees of Kygelia, the sausage tree in the upper right, that's why we have sausage fruits formed on the sausage trees in Miami. They also love in our yard Thunbergia grandiflora, which we have growing in the backyard along a fence. It's such a vigorous vine. Normally, it was always reaching out and growing over our gazebo. We're always fighting it back. But the last year or two, we've had an awful lot of iguanas that love to eat Thunbergia. So unfortunately, all that's left for the orioles has been the firebush. Here's a beautiful bird style flower, the man in the ground, Ipomea microdactyla. This is an endangered species, endemic to Pine Rocklands here and also elsewhere in the Caribbean. Studied by Dr. John Geiger, who I'm mentioning because I see him in the audience. Look at the beautiful pollen on this plant. And these certainly are visited by hummingbirds as they migrate through in the fall and spring in South Florida. I don't have any good photos of that, so I just stuck a ruby-throated hummingbird picture here. But we've seen lots of different things visiting these flowers. There's a sulfur butterfly in the upper left-hand corner. Maybe its proboscis can reach down the tube for the nectar. But there are lots of other visitors, small bees, some of which may shove their whole body down in the tube to reach the nectar, but a lot of them just look for the, I keep having to move my little bar. It's in the way of what I want to see. On the lower right, maybe you can see this bee with his mouth parts open, gathering pollen that's been scattered on the petals by some of the other visitors. So any of these actions could help pollinate the plant. So we saw a butterfly visiting that bird pollinated flower and bird designed flower. And I want you to keep in mind as we're going through some of these groups of flowers, almost all of them are visited by other things. besides just the one the syndrome would suggest. But if you want to have butterflies in your yard or in a public space, you need to have flowers for nectar, and certain butterflies need pollen too. They soak it in nectar and get the amino acids from it. You need host plants for the caterpillars. There's a monarch drawing here. Of course, we know no matter how many milkweed plants you have, the monarchs always eat them all up. Natural population control for the butterfly, I guess. You need shelter and structure in your yard, not just a flat bed of flowers like was in that Miami postcard I got, but you need places for them to hang out and also to make their chrysalises. But probably most importantly, you need a space that is pesticide free, because nothing gets rid of pollinators as quickly as when you spray for pest insects. So here is one interesting butterfly. I just raised it for the first time this last year. I was walking down Ludlam and I saw these little caterpillar fold over things on a Pisidia, the Jamaica dogwood tree. And around the block in another place, I saw the same kind of shelters on a pongam tree. I thought these couldn't be the same, but indeed they were. They were the hammock skipper, Polygonus leo. And in our studies of pollination in natural areas around South Florida, this is a common visitor to many flowers. You can see it here on flowers of Stachytarphida, the blue porterweed. Now, this is a butterfly that appeals an awful lot to young men because it has a very powerful sounding common name, the ruddy daggerwing, Marpesia petraeus. This big butterfly can insert its tiny mouth parts into these tiny wild coffee flowers and many other flowers we've seen it visiting. In the upper right, you can see the butterfly as you often may observe it, often in a hammock, hanging out under a leaf, looking like a leaf. But the caterpillars are pretty spectacular. And we've reared them from my next door neighbor's ficus tree. It's a native ficus. And when we see herbivory on it, sometimes it's caterpillars of this ruddy daggerwing. And the pupa is pretty rugged and scary looking too, the chrysalis in the lower right-hand part of this slide. A lot of things that we call butterflies are actually in a special group of butterflies called skippers that have thicker bodies, hooked antennae, and are very fast flyers. And skippers love to visit flowers for nectar. In the middle, you can see something I raised from our backyard, Horace's dusky wing, visiting a mint flower, Hyptis alata. And its larval host plant is oak trees, the common live oaks that we all have. On the left is a sachem on a blazing star flower. This is a skipper that the caterpillars eat grasses, as do the larvae or caterpillars of the Baracoa skipper shown on the right, Polites baracoa. It's entering the flower of the pineland golden trumpet. This is a flower that's very pretty, common in pine rocklands. Its flower looks a lot like alamandas, the exotic plant cultivated commonly. Both of them have nectar deeply hidden. If you can see in the left, there's this rotate surface of petals, this bell in which it's just a space, and at the bottom of it are the sex organs of the flower. Below that is the nectar. So to reach the nectar, this little Baracoa skipper has to go all the way in the flower and shove its mouth down that little teeny tube at the bottom. After it does, it's very pleased with itself. You can see it sitting on top of the flower there. So this plant has nectar that's deeply hidden. This was studied by one of the people from our plant ecology lab. And Bete Barrios found it was visited by many things: large bees, smaller bees, on the lower left, skippers like the Barracoa skipper, and large butterflies like the Gulf fritillary. But she found that big bees are the best pollinators, because one visit from a big bee can make a fruit set, whereas the others may take many more. And speaking of skippers, this is a common gardener's complaint, at least from Farmer John, who lives in this house. Who is eating my beans? When he plants beans, usually before the bean plants are very big, we see an outbreak of these little foldovers, and they're little shelters made by caterpillars of the long-tailed skipper, one of my favorite butterflies, Urbanus proteus. It's cute that its name is Urbanus because it does very well in the urban environment as well as in nature. Here it's visiting a beautiful Asteraceae flower on a native plant. Here's the big fat caterpillar. This one you can tell is about to change its head. And these are what the little teeny turnover of leaves look like. So in our house, we've reached a compromise. When the bean plants are young, I will let him, and I even join the farmer in squishing these little shelters to kill the caterpillars, because if we don't, they'll eat up the bean plants before they get very big. But once they've reached a critical size, then we let the butterflies eat them because we love to have these butterflies around. This is a beautiful flower, the pineland petunia, with a big rotate corolla, purple, a long tube, as you can see. And from this, we would predict, must be a butterfly flower. But as it turns out, it's visited by both bees and butterflies. And here is another, well, a bluer flower, another pretty purple flower I was going to say. This one is cultivated, plumbago, but it's a plant around which you sometimes see little blue butterflies flying. And I've noticed sometimes butterflies like flowers the same color that they are, and certainly that's the case here. I brought some of these flowers in once for a botany class, local flora. We were looking at them under the microscope, and students found these little things in the, in the flowers, in the inflorescence. Maybe you can see here tiny caterpillars. And these are caterpillars of the Cassius blue butterfly, Leptodes cassius. Here's a caterpillar, the pupa or chrysalis. Over here on the right, you can see a poor caterpillar with a hole in it from which a parasitoid emerged and spun a cocoon. So there's a whole little ecosystem right in these ornamental blue flowered plants. But this isn't their only host plant. Different studies in our lab have found these caterpillars, eating native legumes, including the endangered Amorpha crenulata. And here are the adult Cassius blues. They visit a variety of flowers. Here's Melanthera and Heliotropium. But if you're going to have a pollinator garden and you want to attract butterflies, there is one plant you must have. And Patty Ferris has collected seeds and distributed them for many years at the Ramble and other native plant events. On the upper left, you can see the flower of the corky stem. On the right, the fruit, and this flower isn't very big. It's maybe 1.5 centimeters across. Its pollinators are quite interesting, by the way, but we won't talk about them right now because this is host plant for several beautiful butterflies. The white spiny caterpillars of the zebra longwing, Heliconius cheratonia. And this is a butterfly. I don't know if you can see its proboscis very well here. It's going into the flower. And it has pollen on the proboscis. So these longwing butterflies, butterflies in this family, which are very abundant in the tropics, have evolved to utilize pollen. They don't eat it because they don't have eating mouth parts, but they soak pollen with nectar and gain nutrition. And these are very long-lived butterflies as butterflies go. Also eating the corky stem passion vine are caterpillars of the Gulf fritillary. These are the orange spiky ones that you see on the upper left. And here's a beautiful Gulf fritillary from the underside. They have these silvery spots. This one is drinking nectar from a fading flower of the roughly velvet seed. And the leaves are also eaten by caterpillars of the Julia butterfly. Those are orange and white with long, kind of scary looking spines. And here's a Julia. So these butterflies are all very important flower visitors. To have them around, you not only need flowers, but you have to have the host plant for their caterpillars to sustain them in your garden. So we've spent a lot of time, where's my clock, on butterflies. I want to give equal time to bees because although butterflies are very beautiful and by and large harmless, people sometimes are a little afraid of bees because some of them sting. But in reality, there are so many different kinds of native bees as well as honeybees which are introduced. Most of them don't want to get you. They just want to get whatever the flowers have to offer and go about their business. So to have a garden that supports bees, you need to have the floral rewards that that kind of bee needs. Some bees drink nectar, some drink nectar and use pollen. Some are pollen-only bees. They collect pollen and provision their nests for their offspring. And some bees collect oil from flowers. There are even flowers with resin, like clusias have this, and all kinds of different rewards for different kinds of bees. Bees need a garden that is not sterile. They need places to build their nests. Some nest in the ground, so it's good to have little patches of exposed soil here and there, sandy soil. Some even make their nests under lime rocks or in the base of gnarly tree roots. Some nest in dead stems. So if you're a very tidy gardener and you remove all the dead stuff, that's not good for certain kinds of bees. And on trees in your yard, if you leave a little dead wood there, some excavate and make nests in those places. But most importantly of all, and it's the most important for bees, even more so than butterflies, you need a pesticide-free space. Now we need to be careful not only of the things you might spray or sprinkle on your plants, but systemic insecticides that are commonly used by nurseries and even promoted for homeowners to use. They kill herbivorous insects that eat the plant, but unfortunately, when the plants decompose, those chemicals aren't all gone. And these are some of the chemicals that are thought to wreak havoc with the nervous systems of invertebrates. Here is a big sunflower that grew in our garden this winter. Our next door neighbor, John Perez, gave Farmer John at my house a bunch of tomato plants and also sunflower seeds. And so he planted some. And in doing so, we became part of the great Sunflower Project. This is a project that's gone on for many years where people all around the world plant sunflowers and see what kinds of bees visit them. So this picture I took in our yard on the left, that's a honeybee. And around the block, there's a huge honeybee nest in a tree we're always keeping our eye on. On the right, this is a large carpenter bee. So all kinds of bees, big and small, will visit sunflowers because they have nectar and pollen. And if you grow them, they're not a native plant, but you can take the seeds later and feed them to the birds in your bird feeder if you want. One thing I forgot to say about the Great Sunflower Project is I don't know if I can go backwards, but anyway, it's an example of a citizen science project where everybody and anybody can make a certain kind of observation and share the info, and people around the world can learn, and scientists can learn about diversity of bees in these different places. This beautiful picture was taken by Jim Snyder of a large green female Agapostemon anonyma bee on Bidens. And Bidens is a widespread tropical, some people think it's a weed, some people don't. It's a very nice plant to have in your yard because it attracts all kinds of bees and butterflies. As I said before, a lot of flowers have many different kinds of visitors coming to them, but some flowers are very specifically for bee visitors. Flowers that have bilateral symmetry or zygomorphy, that is, there's only one plane of symmetry through the flower, like in this butterfly pea here. If you divide it down the middle, two halves are the same. Just like our bodies are bilaterally symmetrical. If you divide yourself down the middle, two halves are similar, it's the same. But if you do it the other way, top and bottom, they're very different. So one of our beautiful native plants, blue curls, has a mechanism for bees to enter the flower, and bees of a certain size will have their the back of their abdomen dusted with pollen, and then they'll visit another flower and deposit it on the female receptive area, the stigma. Here's a bee that's covered with pollen on a blue curl. The butterfly pea, which is one of the biggest, prettiest legume flowers, has a flower that's kind of upside down as pea flowers go, but different size bees visit it differently. Here's a smaller bee visiting with its abdomen toward the top, and this part of the flower is where all of the stamens and little ovary that will develop into a fruit is. So the pollen comes out on the underside of the abdomen. Larger bees visit this way, poking their head in, and they get pollen on the back of their thorax. Now, I don't understand really, why is this called a butterfly pea when bees are the main visitors? I think we should call it the bee pea, although maybe that chain of gas stations would have a lawsuit against us. So, oops, I forgot to press that for my arrow there. Some plants in our native flora have oil as a reward. The locust berry, Bersanima lucida, is one of these, pollinated only by centrist bees, which are bees that come and straddle the middle of the flower, scrape the oil glands underneath, and pat the oil into the fuzzy parts of their legs. This plant is also really nice to have because it's a host plant for the Florida dusky wing butterfly, which is very common in the Keys. I've never found any on locust berries here in Miami, but I'm always looking. So in the upper left-hand corner here is the locust berry, our native Malpighiaceae, that's the family of this plant. But we have a number of cultivated plants. Stigmaphyllin, it's a vine with these clawed petals, skinny at the bottom, wide at the top. And the oil glands are between the clawed petals. And we have Malpighia coccidura. This is a little shrub people often have low growing around their doors. And on both of these, at times, I've seen these special bees, Centris aerans. Oops, the top and bottom here is a native oil collecting bee. And in the last decade or so, there's a non-native, the Centris lanosa bee that's come up from Central America. They both like these flowers very much. So, one thing I forgot to say about those Centris bees is they are bees that nest in stems of plants, dead stems of plants. So if we're too tidy in our yard, we're taking away their nesting areas. Our research in different ways has shown that cultivated plants can be very important in supporting pollinators between natural areas. In people's yards, plants that they've grown for beauty, many are exotic, but they still have floral rewards that can support pollinators. And of course, in my neighborhood, especially where there's a street called Mango Terrace, this is mango blooming season. This guy doesn't have on a mask because of his allergies, but rather because of the pandemic. But because mangoes flower prolifically at the same time, and a lot of their pollen gets into the air, they can be allergenic. So it's thought that this type of plant relies on pollinators, but also some of the pollen is moved by the wind. In fact, pollinators are responsible for most of the tropical fruits we enjoy. This book, edited by Jorge Peña, who retired not that long ago from Trek in Homestead, examines the pollinators as well as the pests of those fruits, which makes sense because he was the tropical fruit crops entomologist. Now, Miami is a city famous for its nightlife. So I know you're wondering, what about night visitors to flowers? These are mostly moths, and moth syndrome flowers are normally pale in color, often white. They have very sweet odors, most of them. And in our lab, Cleo Pimienta is studying moth-pollinated flowers, and she calls them, rather than odors, parfums. So I like to think of them as perfumes to attract the moths from a distance. Moth-pollinated flowers have nectar rewards, and if you want to have the moths around, you have to have the larval host plants too. This is not a native flower. It's native to Madagascar. Just bloomed on my back porch pretty recently. It's called the Darwin orchid, Angraecum sesquipedale. It's called the Darwin orchid because when Darwin saw this orchid with its very long nectar spur, almost a foot long, he said, there must be a moth with a proboscis, with a tongue that long. And indeed, there is. He was right. Here are native Echites, the Rubbervine, has quite a long tube, not quite like Angraecum. Here's the base of the flower and the long tube. And these flowers can last for 7 to 10 days. They last a long time. They stay open for many nights. Because I've studied this plant, I've spent a long time watching them at night, and I have never, ever seen a visitor, though I am sure they're hawk moths. And one day at FIU, we had some of these growing on a fence to do pollination experiments. One of my student helpers, Wendy Villavicencio, said, what is this thing? And she had found this poor moth hanging by its tongue. Its tongue was stuck in an old flower that had fallen off, and this was draped over a vine. But this was the smoking gun we'd been looking for, proof that the flowers were visited by moths, hawk moths. So not only is Echites a good plant for hawk moths to visit, but it's a host plant for this beautiful moth in the lower left-hand corner called the Faithful Beauty, Composia fidelissima. The caterpillars are deposited in a group, and if you're lucky, you may find a whole bunch of them starting to eat together. They don't completely consume the plant, but they're beautiful moths to have, and they visit a lot of flowers and pollinate too. Here is a spectacular native plant, certainly well adapted for hawk moth pollination. I first learned about this flower when Kiki Mutis mentioned it to me in a class she was taking with me. I had never seen it or heard of it. But in one of my neighbors' yards, they regard it as a weed that keeps growing up. There is a moonflower vine, and I picked some flowers and collected the pollen and took these pictures. And it's a good thing because I wanted to pollinate some the next morning, and the gardeners or the people who do the yard work there had cut it all down, ripped it out. I hope it comes back soon. Here is the long nectar tube. This is just the base of the flower here. The ovary and everything's down here. The rotate corolla, and here's a close-up of the anthers with the big pollen grains. Morning glories often have really big pollen. So the takeaway I want you to have from this little talk is I want you to have fun with flowers and their visitors. You should observe the flowers whenever you feel like it at different times of day, when you're sitting and relaxing or, visiting with your friends. Most people have cell phones, ta-da, and these are very good for taking pictures. I'm amazed how good of close-ups I can get with my cell phone. So you can take pictures of different visitors on flowers, or if you don't know the plant, take a picture of the plant, and then you can use iNaturalist to record what you see. I'm really glad that next talk the presenter will talk about iNaturalist and how to use it, because we all should be using it. It can help us in identifying visitors and plants and their associations. And in doing that, in sharing your photos, you're adding to the citizen science databases, of which there are many, like butterflies of Florida or mushrooms of Michigan. You don't even have to enter your picture to a certain project. It just gets collected eventually into that project. So here's a picture of the iNaturalist web page with a flower that someone has uploaded from Sage Hen Creek. Turns out it's Western snake root, but maybe she didn't even know that. She just put it up because it was a pretty flower. This is how it works. You make an observation, and it could be a picture of a snake, a plant, an ant, whatever you like. You upload it, and in that way you share it with fellow naturalists. And the naturalists include experts, amateurs, enthusiasts, casual observers. They can, people will identify your observation as close as they can, to the family or genus, sometimes to the species. And then you can discuss your findings with others. It's a very cool thing. I use it in my classes, Plant Ecology Lab, this last fall. We had a lot of fun with it. So what are the resources that you can use when you're asking the question, what should I plant to have a good pollinator garden? My favorite tool, and this is a tool I use in my teaching too, I have students work in groups to plan gardens using native plants that will be ecological landscapes to support wildlife. So you can enter in this Natives for Your Neighborhood website, your zip code, and then you can look in that zip code to see a list of native plants of different life forms. And when you look at a certain native plant, it gives you so much information about it, what it takes to have it grow well, what kind of habitat it's adapted to, and also its natural, its interactions with other species, the wildlife it can support. butterflies that use it as a host plant, etc. And of course, there's lots of useful books I've looked at to learn about these things, and you can too. Gardening in Florida. Not all native plants, but of course, most people here don't have native plants, and it's our mission in the Native Plant Society to get them to switch over. This book, How to Have a Florida Native Yard, and the benefits of that are shown in this circle that you get butterflies, bees, and moths, which are beautiful and fun to watch. One of the authors of those first books, the Florida Gardening book, was Georgia Tasker, and this is a table full of lots of her interesting books. Enchanted Ground is a very nice book about getting your garden started here in South Florida. I've heard a couple of talks lately by Doug Tallamy. Maybe you have too. He's a scientist who works on plant-insect interactions, but he's written some really good books about how you can bring nature into your own yard. And how the second book he wrote is how we conserving nature in our yards are a really hopeful thing for the planet. And here's a pollinator victory garden. Victory gardens were vegetable gardens grown during the war. So we can do this for pollinators now to conserve them. And we garden not just for flower visitors, hummingbirds and butterflies in Roger Hammer's book here, but birds come to eat fruits and other animals too. And I wouldn't be forgiven by Roger Hammer if I didn't give a plug to his beautiful wildflower books and keys, which really help us learn a lot about plants, because it's not just what is the name of this, but he gives us a lot of good ecological information and sometimes some pretty funny history too. So that's the end of my talk. I'm going to stop my sharing, and I invite you to ask some questions, make some observations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Awesome presentation. I did see that there were a couple questions in the chat. Gwen Brzicki asks, how do you get the skippers to stand still long enough to get such good photos? And I'm curious about that too, actually.
Well, I find that when they have their mouth parts stuck into something, they don't move very much. So if you're being quiet, sitting sort of near a plant, if you happen to have your camera at the ready, that helps. I mean, so many good pictures I haven't gotten, but for photographing flower visitors, it's when they're getting their reward that they aren't thinking about anything else, and you can usually get a good picture.
All right. And Barbara, I saw you put a comment on the Gulf fritillary caterpillars. You found it on Passiflora pallens? Because I have some of that growing at home. For the life of me, I never see a caterpillar on it. I have to trim it back all the time.
Exactly. It's the first time I've ever seen any of the Haliconian butterflies lay eggs on it, and there's actually caterpillars on it. So I think they just ran out of Passiflora suberosa because there's so many of them in my yard.
So actually, those butterflies eat edible passionflower too, Passiflora edulis, and probably other species. But the corky stem is so good because you can even do guerrilla gardening with it. You can take the seeds and just wherever you're going, throw some seeds out, and soon the vines will be growing there and butterflies will be around. It's really cool.
I have a question for all these butterfly people. Why is it that I had never seen a butterfly trapped in a spider's web? I've never seen a spider.
You know, which ones I see in spiders' webs, even in my own yard sometime, are Atala butterflies. Because I think
Really?
they're not too bright. They're kind of slow. But then the spider knows that they're poisonous, so it just leaves them there. I liberate them sometimes. How about anybody else? Have you observed butterflies and spiders?
Yeah, white peacocks and some of the little small moths that fly at night will get caught.
I've heard something about the scales. I don't know if that's only moths, but the scales kind of help them get out of spider webs, since they have scales all over their wings.
I think you're right, Joe, because if you hold a butterfly in your fingers, their scales come off in your fingers, unless you're careful to hold them between your fingers, where at least my fingers are much drier here. This part's more sticky sometimes. Anybody else, please unmute yourself if you, Dr. Geiger, I see. Question?
Suzanne, that was a terrific talk. Those images were gorgeous, Suzanne.
I think some of them were yours. I hope you don't mind I use them.
No, not at all, not at all. No, they were mostly yours, Suzanne. But no, I just want to tell you, I think, Suzanne, I may have that dusky wing caterpillar eating my locust berry. Because I asked Jen Posley about it, and she kind of gave me the diagnostic. But Suzanne, I see the damage on the plant, and I know Tina Whalen, so Tina Ugarte, she definitely has it in her yard. But we're both so darn close to Larry and Penny, that may help a little bit, right?
You lucky ducks. That's great. Yeah, I know I've seen the caterpillars in the Keys, and they have like little cute, they aren't eyes, but they're bright spots.
Spots. Yeah.
Oh, I see Phil Busey's kitty. I'm going to get mine at the end too. That was a good idea to put the treats there.
Suzanne, I see a question in the chat. Could you see it? It's by Maria.
Let me look. I can if I open the chat.
I had a question while she's looking, and this is Farmer John. We've tried these bee boxes that seem to be very popular in some places, where the bees go in and pack themselves in and nest in there. But we haven't, and Suzanne mentioned, them nesting in hollow twigs and things, but we haven't had much success with bee boxes per se. Has anybody tried that and had any success?
I meant to put a photo of those in. They're really popular and sold a lot around Gainesville at flower fairs and stuff. Have you,
Farmer John, all you need to do is put up a bird box, because every time I put up the screech owl box, I'm totally inundated by bees.
But we don't want honeybees, Joy. We want cute native bees that nest in the hole.
One of the issues with bee boxes is our native bees, a lot of them are solitary, and they don't congregate together like honeybees, and it's not actually a good idea to encourage them to all move into one structure. They could share too many diseases. So they need to be smaller, and I've included it in a lot of information and presentations, and if you reach out to me, I can share some publications on it that are on Echites and on Xerxes Society as well. But don't buy the real big ones. Buy little, make them yourself out of a couple of pieces of bamboo.
Good idea, Barb.
Or old toilet paper rolls wound up tightly. I made a whole bunch. They were at Butterfly and Bird Day at Castilla.
Well, we saved toilet paper rolls for a long time to make binoculars for little kids. That's a good use for them.
Great for composting.
Maria, let me look at I have a city park behind my home. It's being revamped. I approached the city regarding the landscaping being more native species. They've hired a company to prepare blueprints of the new landscaping and want my input advice. Or my input review. Any advice? Yes, look at those plants and make sure they really are natives that they're using, because a lot of people don't know that much about plants. So it helps for you to check that.
What has been your experience? Have you, I imagine you've
Thank you.
interacted with the
Hi.
city. Hi.
Hi. I don't know. I
Which
think they
city?
usually take my word for it. But yes, I was on the landscape committee of South Miami, and we were invited to weigh in on the re-landscaping of the area around Metro Rail and down US 1. And we were pleased to see that there were native sable palms, but you know, there was an effort to plant some pine trees and other native shrubs. So yeah, if you ask your friends for help, unless you know native plants pretty well, but you can just look at their plans, see what they are, and see if this sounds good to you. And in a lot of the native plant gardening books, it will tell you about what size the plants will get and so on.
Yeah,
Maria, what city is it?
That's North Miami Beach.
North Miami Beach?
Yeah, and what I was encouraging them to do is I the park, of course, I look at it every day, and in terms of a dimensional evaluation, it's kind of two-dimensional. You know, they have a couple of banyan trees. It's a very open canopy, and then the rest is non-native species. You know, that like snake plant and such that are probably only 2 tall. So I've been trying to encourage them to consider more of an understory, more of the perennials, things that attract pollinators, you know, the birds, the bees, the butterflies. I gave them some material when I met with them. I kind of focused on the, what is it, Connect to Protect.
That would be great. And that's focused largely on pine rocklands, which of course we love. But Eve wrote in the chat to look at the natives for your neighborhood site and put the zip code in. That's a really good source.
And you can also use that to check some of the plants. If they've listed natives, you can put that in the plant search and learn more about the plant also. And the butterfly the list of all pollinator plants or larval host plants for butterflies is on miamiblues.org, miamiblue.org's website.
Okay. Yep, I'm going to be learning more about tropical ecosystems.
You've also got a resource here in North Dade. There's a related organization called Bound by Beauty, started by Mary Benton in Miami Shores. And we're actually trying to draw up landscape templates for people that want to do butterfly pollinator gardening. And there's a lot of people that are affiliates or board members of Bound by Beauty that know a lot about the plants that can be planted in North Dade, which is a little bit different than the pine rocklands because we're sandier soil, and some of the pine rockland plants just don't do well up here.
Yeah,
right. Mary was actually in this webinar. I guess she left a little earlier, but yeah, she's Bound by Beauty. You can find their website, or you can go and put your email in their box or something, or I'll put mine in the box. I'll connect you with everybody.
You can also garden for pollinators by the seaside. You just have to have salt-tolerant plants that make flowers.
I'm just excited that they were open-minded enough to. First, we had a conference call. They heard my background. You know, I have a master's in forestry, bachelor's biology. I'm a GIS analyst. They realized I wasn't, you know, a crackpot, if you don't mind me saying. And then they came and actually walked with me, and we talked a little bit more, you know, so I'm hoping, you know, that I can steer them in that direction. If at all, you know, if possible. They seem open to it. So
that sounds great, Maria. Yeah. If you have kids or nephews and nieces to get involved with their schools and, you know, help teach the kids about things like this too, the more we can reach young people and make them aware of that the planet isn't just for us, but it's for all these other creatures and plants too. We'll be better off in the future. So I think it's time time to bring our pets. And I saw Joy's kitty with a collar on. That poor baby must have had an operation or something. I'm going to get my cat.
Show us again, Joy. We want to see.
She's not very cooperative, but I'll see if I can go get her. So it was a big week for the little kitten.
Pumpkin.
Oh, Maria, look, yours and mine look so much alike. And Edelman Lopez has a kitty of this type too, although maybe that one's black.
I don't know if I'll be able to catch mine, but we have 2 tuxedo cats here at home as well.
Aw.
They look very similar to those as well. Yeah.
Uh-oh. Do I need to expand that Friday Cat Day email?
Yes, if anybody wants to
Probably.
be on Barb's Friday Cat Day, just let her know. Oh, look at that fluffy black one. Wow.
I started it during COVID. We had to have something to laugh at.
And finally, a doggy. Gwen has a doggy. Good.
I have 2 doggies and 2 kitties.
Oh.
And
This is my
Demetrius,
COVID
what do
kitty.
you have in your lap? Is that a little?
And there's the old guy.
Sweet. Oh, hello.
Oh, wow. This is
like
I am
Coco
one of
Thrinax
those.
for you native plant people.
Coco Thrinax.
James, what is that? Show that again, James. I dare you. Oh my goodness.
Oh,
I
it's
am
a
a,
pretty.
That's cheating, Jim.
You need to send that photo. I'll share that for Friday Cat Day.
I have to get John Geiger one of those for his office.
all right.
Oh,
I'm
guys,
waiting for
well,
someone to
thank
come out with
you so
a
much.
pet iguana.
No, there's too many of them.
I was gonna say we all have a pet iguana.
Yeah.
Well,
And
thank you very much for sharing your families with me. Oh, Gillen, what a cute doggy. So, Mr. President, any business to conduct?
That's pretty much it. It seems we can wrap up for the night. I think if everyone can join me to give Suzanne a big round of applause. Great presentation, and I love the social aspect at the end for bringing in
Oh,
pets. It's
thank
the
you.
first
And if
first time I've
anybody
seen
needs
that. I love it.
help in the future, please just contact me through my FIU email. I'll get back to you. Okay,
But-
guys.
It was nice to meet
Bye,
everyone. Thank you.
Have
Thank
a
you.
good one,
Thank you.
everyone.
Great.
all
Thank
right.
you for
Thank you.
attending. Thank you, Suzanne.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Good
Gwen.
night.